There's something peculiar that happens when two people become tethered. Not necessarily by proximity, not even always by intention, but by thought. You're walking down the street, minding your own business, and suddenly you feel it. A pull, a whisper of their name in your mind, a sudden memory, an emotion that doesn't match the moment. It's not rational, it's not planned, and yet it hits with the intensity of something that matters. Because maybe it does. We've been told by modern culture to dismiss these things, to chalk them up as coincidence or cognitive bias, to believe that if you think about someone and they think about you at the same time, it's just a trick your mind is playing on you. But what if it's not? What if there's more to it? What if two minds, once intertwined emotionally, can continue to echo off each other across time and space like ripples from a shared stone dropped in two different ponds? You see, human beings are not machines. We're not simply reacting to stimuli like robots following a script. We're deep creatures, psychologically complex, emotionally layered, spiritually unpredictable. And when two people forge a connection, especially one rooted in vulnerability, longing, and emotional truth, something invisible is created. You can't see it, can't touch it, but you can feel it. And when that bond exists, it doesn't just vanish because time has passed or conversations have stopped. Sometimes the thinking persists, and sometimes it's mutual. But here's the challenge. We live in an age of noise, distractions, digital clutter. We've grown so used to silencing our intuition that we second guess the very signs that used to guide us. How many times have you brushed off a sudden pang of sadness or a random dream about someone from your past, telling yourself it meant nothing? How often have you felt a person's presence so strongly it was nearly physical, only to suppress the sensation because it didn't make logical sense? Yet logic isn't always the compass for truth. Emotion carries its own intelligence. And when two individuals are genuinely, consistently thinking of each other, that emotional frequency leaves clues. It appears in the moments you least expect. A song, a glance, a pattern in your life that seems to circle back to one name, one face, one unresolved presence. This isn't about mysticism or romance novels. This is about the psychology of connection. When you've loved someone deeply or been profoundly impacted by them, their imprint doesn't just fade. The nervous system remembers. The unconscious mind holds on. And when their thought of you collides with your thought of them, a strange phenomenon arises. An intersection that makes itself known in subtle but undeniable ways. These signs are not fantasies. They are signals, echoes, and they should be approached with seriousness and discernment because they can mean many things. Maybe there's unfinished business. Maybe there's healing that still needs to happen. Maybe the connection is trying to say goodbye. Or maybe it's pointing you to something you haven't yet understood. But before we can decode these signs, we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to strip away the ego-driven narrative that tells us we're imagining things just because they don't fit into a spreadsheet. We must be willing to confront the possibility that emotional bonds are real forces and that when they're mutual, they don't always stay silent. They make themselves known in dreams, in thoughts, in strange alignments that challenge what we thought we knew about time and space. Consider this. How many times have you reached for your phone only for it to ring with their name on the screen? How often have you opened your social media only to see their photo pop up despite not having searched for them in months? How many times have you thought of them intensely in the morning only to learn that they asked about you that very day? Patterns like these are easy to dismiss until they repeat, until they become undeniable, until they ask you to pay attention. Now, This doesn't mean you should chase these signs recklessly. That's not the point. The goal isn't to romanticize mutual thinking as a fairy tale. The goal is to understand it, to listen to what it's trying to say. Because just as two people can align in dysfunction, they can also align in growth. Sometimes mutual thought is a reflection of longing. Sometimes it's a symbol of readiness. And sometimes it's the mind's final attempt to bring closure to what couldn't be spoken aloud. There's a weight to mutual thinking, a sacred weight. And if you're feeling it, and you suspect they are too, don't just brush it off. Ask yourself, why now? What am I being shown? Is this a call to reach out, or a sign to finally let go with peace? Is this about them, or is it about me finally understanding the lesson they brought into my life? So before we dive into the 10 signs that tend to surface when two people are mutually thinking of each other, let's anchor ourselves in one truth. Just because it's invisible doesn't mean it's not real. And just because it defies logic doesn't mean it lacks meaning. The human heart knows things long before the mind is ready to admit them. These signs, if they're showing up, are not here to torment you. They're here to wake you up. Because something happens when two minds, two hearts, start speaking in silence. It's not a game, it's not delusion. It's communication without words. And if you're brave enough to pay attention, it might just tell you what you need to hear most. There are moments in life when something happens that cannot be easily explained. You think of someone out of nowhere, and a moment later, they call you. You dream of someone you haven't seen in years, and the next day their name comes up in conversation. You feel a surge of emotion, sadness or joy with no clear cause, only to later find out that the person who once meant the world to you was going through something significant at that exact time. These occurrences are often brushed aside as coincidence. That's the safe, rational explanation. But if you really pay attention, if you start to observe the patterns with an open mind, you begin to see a deeper rhythm at play, an invisible thread that connects one soul to another, one mind to another, in a way that transcends physical distance and even time. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. We are hardwired to seek connection, not just through speech and action, but through intuition, through shared emotional space. When two people have formed a deep emotional bond, it's not easily severed. The residue of shared experiences, unresolved feelings, and emotional intensity lingers long after the relationship itself changes form. It's not just memory, it's energetic memory. It's the imprint of someone's presence on your nervous system. And this imprint doesn't just sit dormant, it reverberates. When both people are thinking about each other, especially at the same time, it creates a strange kind of resonance, like two instruments tuned to the same frequency across a vast distance. It doesn't require them to be aware of it consciously. It doesn't even demand that they be on speaking terms, but the alignment in thought can manifest in ways that are undeniably real. These shared moments of synchronicity carry a kind of emotional weight that logic can't quantify. And when they occur repeatedly, they start to challenge the notion that we're all just isolated beings separated by skin and silence. You might be going about your day, fully focused on something else, when a memory hits you with unexpected force, not a fleeting thought, but a wave, vivid, emotional, gripping. It pulls you into a moment you hadn't thought about in ages, a conversation, a glance, a shared silence. And just as suddenly as it came, you find yourself wondering what they're doing, where they are, whether they feel it too. This is the beginning of synchronicity. A mental and emotional tether being activated, not by you alone, but by the other person's mind reaching out in its own silent way. There's something profound about realizing that thought is not just private, it's relational. The mind is not a closed system. When we think of someone intensely, when we emotionally engage with a memory or idea of them, we are sending something out, an emotional, and if they are doing the same, whether consciously or unconsciously, a kind of psychic loop forms. It's not magic, it's the result of deep emotional encoding. Your brain is wired to notice patterns connected to people who mattered to you. But when those patterns begin to surface, not only from within, but seemingly from the outside world too, something more than memory is occurring. That's the realm of synchronicity. In those moments, time behaves differently. The past doesn't feel so distant. The gap between you and the other person seems to shrink, not in a physical sense, but in an emotional one. Their name shows up on a screen. You hear their favorite song in a random place. A mutual friend randomly brings them up. These are not just memory triggers. They are signs of alignment. And alignment suggests that something is moving not just within you, but between you. This doesn't mean that you're destined to reconnect or that every synchronicity is an invitation to act, but it does mean that your emotional landscape is alive with meaning. And that meaning is worth investigating. When you're thinking of them and they're thinking of you, when that happens simultaneously, it's not always because you're holding on. Sometimes it's because there's something unfinished, something unspoken, something still tethering your souls in the space where language cannot reach. To recognize synchronicity is not to abandon logic, it's to embrace the full depth of human experience. It's to admit that the mind operates on more than just facts. It moves on stories, feelings, archetypes, intuition. And when two people become part of each other's psychological stories in a significant way, their minds don't just part ways cleanly. They return to each other, at times unpredictably, like waves drawn back to the shore. That return, the moment when you both think of each other without knowing the other is doing the same, is a form of contact. And whether it leads to closure, reconciliation, or simply clarity, it is something real. But this phenomenon asks for your attention, not your obsession. It's not about chasing every coincidence or turning emotion into fantasy. It's about becoming attuned to the deeper dialogue happening beneath the surface of your life. It's about learning to trust that when something feels meaningful, it probably is. When you sense a connection that defies explanation, it may not be your imagination playing tricks on you. It may be your psyche inviting you to pay attention to the patterns that emerge when two souls are not quite finished speaking. So when you feel it, when you sense that they're thinking of you as you are thinking of them, don't dismiss it, but don't idolize it either. Instead, let it inform you. Let it become a mirror. Ask yourself what it's trying to reveal about your emotional state, your unresolved fears, your longings, your regrets. Use the moment of shared thought as an opportunity to reflect, to integrate, and to understand the deeper forces at play in your life. Because connection, real connection, does not need to be visible to be valid. Sometimes it is the invisible signs, the ones that whisper instead of shout, that reveal the most profound truths about who we are, what we want, and what we're still holding on to when no one else is watching. Most people walk through life unaware of the immense power their subconscious mind holds. It is the undercurrent of our behavior, the unseen architecture of our thoughts, emotions, desires, and fears. At least, and it plays an even more profound role in relationships, especially those that leave a mark. When you find yourself repeatedly thinking of someone, often without reason, it's not always because your conscious mind is choosing to recall them. More often than not, it's the subconscious pulling them into focus, not because of sentimentality, but because there is something unresolved, something emotionally unfinished that demands attention. And when two people are experiencing this subconscious pull simultaneously, the effect can be both confusing and undeniably powerful. The subconscious mind doesn't operate in words. It speaks in images, sensations, symbols, and emotional currents. It communicates through dreams, intuition, physical tension, and emotional reactions that seem out of proportion to the moment. So when someone appears in your thoughts again and again, not as a fleeting memory, but with a weight that interrupts your mental space, it's often a sign that the subconscious is trying to bring something forward. It could be longing, guilt, regret, affection, or unfinished grief. And what makes this experience even more intense is when both people are experiencing the same pull at the same time. You may not have spoken in months. You may be living separate lives. But the energy that once existed between you still has momentum. Emotions don't just disappear. They get buried, displaced, repressed. They find their way into your body, your habits, and your dreams. And they surface when the conscious mind quiets. That's why someone may pop into your head in the middle of the night or during a moment of vulnerability. That's when the subconscious feels safest to speak. And it's not just about missing them. It's about confronting the part of you that still feels incomplete, still feels bound to the emotional truth of that connection. What's astonishing is that this process can happen on both sides. Without communication, without deliberate intention, you may be sitting in silence, overcome with a memory, while they too are being pulled back into the same emotional frame. This isn't fantasy. It's the way the subconscious organizes unresolved emotional bonds. And if the connection was intense, rooted in vulnerability, trust, or even trauma, it leaves behind a kind of psychological footprint, a trail the mind follows when it seeks closure, understanding, or reconciliation. There's also something to be said about emotional timing. The subconscious often resurfaces emotional material not randomly, but when you are finally in a place to process it. Sometimes you've grown enough, strengthened enough, clarified enough to handle what you couldn't before. That's when they reappear in your mind, and not just as a memory, but as a presence, a vivid emotional experience that doesn't make sense logically, but feels deeply real. When this happens to both people, it often triggers an invisible loop of attention. One thinks of the other, which causes an emotional wave that reaches out. The other feels it maybe without understanding it fully, and thinks of them in return. The subconscious creates a cycle of mutual reflection, even across silence. We tend to underestimate just how much of human connection exists beyond the conscious realm. We assume if there are no texts, no calls, no interactions, then the bond must be dead. But the truth is that many of our strongest relationships live within us, regardless of whether they exist in the outer world. And those inner connections continue to breathe through the subconscious mind. You might feel their energy in a room they've never entered. You might sense their mood without ever hearing their voice. This isn't illusion. It's the psychological residue of closeness. And when both people feel it, it manifests in repeated thought, parallel emotion, and unexpected synchronicity. But this pull is not always comforting. In fact, it can be unsettling because it forces you to confront emotions you thought were buried. It makes you question your healing, your independence, your progress. But healing isn't about forgetting, it's about integrating. And when someone reappears in your thoughts through the subconscious pull, it's not always a sign to go back. It's often a signal to look deeper, What part of yourself did you lose in that connection? What part of you still feels unseen, unspoken, unresolved? And are they thinking about you too? Not because they want to reopen the door, but because their subconscious is doing the same internal work. You cannot fake emotional truth, and you cannot silence the subconscious forever. It will find ways to speak through dreams, repetition, even physical symptoms. The subconscious is not interested in comfort. It is interested in wholeness. So if you're thinking of someone constantly and it feels involuntary, it might be your psyche trying to reconcile the part of your story that still feels open-ended. And if they're thinking of you too, you may both be caught in the same psychological loop, each trying to make sense of the past in your own way. But here's the crucial point. Just because the subconscious brings someone up doesn't mean the relationship needs to be rekindled. Sometimes it means a part of you is finally ready to say goodbye in a deeper, more honest way. Other times it's showing you that a part of your identity still lives in the shadow of that connection, waiting to be reclaimed. And occasionally, yes, it might mean the door is still cracked open, but that's only meaningful if both people are willing to step into it with clarity and maturity. The subconscious pull is real, but it's not destiny. It's data. It's a message from the deeper self calling your attention to something that matters. So when you feel it, don't rush to conclusions. Don't romanticize it. And don't suppress it either. Sit with it. Listen to what it's trying to say. Use it as an invitation to grow, not toward someone else, but toward a fuller understanding of yourself. Because when two people think of each other at the same time, it's not just memory. It's a sign of internal work unfolding in parallel. And that awareness, if honored, can become a powerful tool for emotional maturity and personal transformation. There is a kind of silence that speaks louder than any conversation. It lives in the space between two people who are no longer in communication but remain tethered by an invisible thread. This silence is not cold or empty. It's charged. It holds weight, meaning, and emotion. When you both stop talking, whether by choice or by circumstance, you may expect the connection to fade, but often it doesn't. In fact, something unexpected happens. You start to notice signs, strange alignments. You think of them, and they appear in your dreams. You feel a wave of emotion that doesn't match your surroundings, and it brings their name to your mind. You see a phrase or hear a song, and it carries their energy. These aren't coincidences. They are expressions of energetic alignment. When two people are thinking about each other at the same time, even without speaking, the silence becomes a carrier of emotion. And often, that silence is louder than words. Many people assume that when a relationship ends or a connection breaks, the emotional line between the two people snaps clean. But that's rarely how the human heart works, especially when the connection was deep, complicated, or unresolved. In those situations, silence does not indicate absence. It indicates storage. Emotions are not eliminated, they're shelved. Questions are not answered, they're postponed. And affection is not erased, it's frozen. But frozen does not mean forgotten. It means dormant. And when both people are thinking about each other, the silence becomes a chamber in which those dormant emotions begin to thaw, often all at once and without warning. One of the most telling signs that you are both thinking about each other is that you begin to feel emotional movement even when nothing has changed on the outside. You may suddenly feel unsettled, nostalgic, or hopeful without any new information or interaction. That's because emotional energy doesn't rely solely on action. It travels through intention, memory, and mental focus. When someone thinks about you intensely, especially if they once had a deep emotional bond with you, that energy has a way of reaching you. You may not understand it, you may not believe in it, but you feel it, and the body knows what the mind tries to deny. There is a reason that even after months of no contact, one small trigger can reopen the entire emotional world of that person. A voice that sounds like theirs, a scent, a street corner. The mind might say it's irrational, but the emotional body doesn't lie. It remembers everything. It stores every laugh, every argument, every unresolved goodbye. And when the emotional energy of the other person reaches you, even unconsciously, it can awaken all of it. This is not fantasy. This is the reality of shared emotional history. When two people have been connected deeply, their nervous systems adapt to each other. They learn each other's emotional rhythms. They co-create an emotional ecosystem. And even in silence, that ecosystem doesn't vanish. It lives in latency. Sometimes this shared energy resurfaces through dreams. That's often where the subconscious feels safe enough to process what the conscious mind avoids. You may find yourself dreaming vividly of them, not just fragments, but full conversations, emotional exchanges, even moments that feel more real than memory. And often these dreams coincide with their own internal experiences. You wake up feeling something shifted. You can't explain it, but you know it meant something. That's not your mind playing tricks on you. That's your psyche doing the work your waking self is afraid to touch. It's also common for mutual thinking to create physical symptoms. A tightness in the chest, sudden anxiety, a heaviness in the stomach. These sensations come out of nowhere, and they often align with emotional shifts in the person you're mentally connected to. You don't see the cause, but you feel the effect. And while modern thought may dismiss this as emotional hypersensitivity, it's more accurate to say you're still attuned. The emotional bridge hasn't collapsed, it's just been quiet. But when both sides walk on it at the same time, even unknowingly, the structure vibrates. Another layer to this experience is the way. And reminders seem to show up with eerie precision. You're not seeking them, but they find you. A message that wasn't meant for you suddenly contains a phrase they used to say. A book opens to a chapter that echoes your last conversation. A stranger says something in passing that hits a nerve only that person ever touched. These signs are not always mystical. Sometimes they are the mind's way of confirming what the heart already suspects. The bond is still alive in some dimension. But what's important is not to mistake this shared energy as a sign that things must be revived. Just because you're both thinking about each other doesn't mean you are meant to reunite. It doesn't mean the connection is healthy or that it will lead somewhere. Sometimes mutual thinking is the psyche's way of seeking closure in the absence of conversation. It's the final processing of a relationship that never fully ended. And in that way, silence becomes its own kind of dialogue. A space where emotions speak in place of words, and presence is felt rather than spoken. It's a deeply human experience to want resolution, to want clarity, to want to know what the silence means. But silence does not always answer in clear language. And sometimes it shows you how deep your feelings still run. Sometimes it shows you what you're still afraid to admit. And sometimes it reminds you that even without words, something between you still breathes. That breath may not mean a return. It may mean a recognition, a moment of truth between two minds who still visit each other in the quiet. So when you find yourself feeling the weight of someone's presence without their physical return, when the silence between you starts to sound like a song you can't stop hearing, don't rush to fill it with noise. Let it be. Let the silence speak. Let it show you what you still carry. And if you suspect they're feeling it too, that you are both walking through the same storm of memory at the same time, know this: It's not a weakness to feel it. It's a sign that what you had mattered. And sometimes that's all the understanding you need. Timing has a strange and often overlooked role in human connection. It is not merely about convenience or logistics. It's about emotional readiness, psychological maturity, and unseen inner cycles. Two people can meet and feel a strong pull toward each other, but if one or both are not in the right place internally, the connection struggles, falters, or even collapses under the weight of unrealized potential. Yet when both individuals are silently growing, when they are healing, understanding, and reshaping themselves separately, there is an invisible synchrony that begins to develop. And when that timing aligns, when you both reach a stage where your hearts, minds, and souls are more prepared, the pull between you intensifies, and thinking about each other becomes almost inevitable. Emotional growth is not linear. You don't simply get better day after day until you are ready for love. Healing happens in spirals. You build strengths you didn't know you needed. During this process, someone who once mattered to you may drift out of your conscious thoughts. You might go days, weeks, or months without their name crossing your mind, but then, out of nowhere, they return. Not because you consciously called them back, but because something inside of you has shifted. Something has opened up that recognizes their energy in a new way. And often, they are going through the same transformation quietly, invisibly, but powerfully. When two people are thinking of each other again after a period of silence or distance, it often indicates that their emotional clocks are syncing up. The work they've done individually creates a shared readiness that didn't exist before. It's as if the unfinished business between them rises to the surface, demanding recognition, not out of desperation, but out of new capacity. The love, the respect, the understanding that couldn't fully flourish in the past begins to look possible, even necessary. And the mind, ruled by the subconscious, responds by bringing that person into sharper mental focus. You might notice that the thoughts you have of them now are different than they used to be. Less about fantasy, more about reality. Less about need, more about truth. You're no longer thinking of them with the desperation of unfinished emotions, but with a clarity that suggests growth. You see their flaws, your own mistakes, the challenges that once overwhelmed you, and yet you feel drawn to them not in spite of these things, but because you understand them better now. This shift in perception is a clear sign that timing has matured both of you in ways you couldn't have forced if you tried. At the same time, when emotional timing aligns, the universe, or whatever name you give to the vast orchestration of events around you, seems to participate. You encounter more signs, more coincidences that feel too precise to ignore. It's as if the world is nudging you, gently reminding you that something significant is brewing beneath the surface. You might bump into a mutual friend. You might hear a song that carries both of your memories. You might dream of them vividly, sensing that they are closer to you than before, even if physically nothing has changed. These signs are not commands. They are reflections of internal readiness. They mirror the subtle truth that you are thinking of each other because something is ripening. Something is coming full circle. It's crucial to understand that even with perfect emotional timing, it doesn't guarantee a fairy tale reunion. It doesn't mean you must reach out or that they will. Sometimes the alignment happens simply to allow forgiveness to flow, to allow peace to settle in your heart, to close a chapter that once felt forever open. And sometimes it opens the door to a new beginning, built not on old wounds, but on new understanding. But whether it leads to reconnection or not, the synchronization of thoughts and feelings is real. It speaks to the profound interconnectedness that human souls can share, even across silence, distance, and time. Timing teaches you that love is not just about attraction or affection. It's about capacity. Capacity to understand, capacity to forgive, capacity to receive and to give without fear or manipulation. When you think of someone at the same time they are thinking of you, and you feel that pull, not from a place of scarcity, but from a place of expansion, it's a sign that you both have grown. You are no longer trapped by the immature patterns that once defined your bond. You are seeing each other and yourselves with wiser, more compassionate eyes. It also teaches patience, because you realize that true connection cannot be rushed. You could have wanted them desperately months or years ago, but if either of you was not ready, no amount of wanting could make it work. Growth had to happen. Lessons had to be learned individually. And when the timing finally matches, the connection feels different. It's less about possession, more about presence. Less about expectation, more about appreciation. You also become more sensitive to the quality of your thoughts. When you think of them now, it's not a frantic longing, but a peaceful curiosity, a gentle warmth, an honoring of what was and an openness to what could be. This emotional shift is a reflection of inner evolution, and often they are experiencing it too. The same invisible threads that once tangled you in confusion are now weaving a new pattern, one that holds more integrity, more dignity, and more truth. Timing is the invisible hand that guides much of what we feel and experience in relationships. When you are both thinking of each other, when the emotions rise without warning but without panic, when the memories return but without the old ache, it is often because you have entered a phase of readiness that wasn't possible before. A phase where your hearts can speak to each other across the silence, where your souls can acknowledge each other without fear. And even if no words are exchanged, even if no reunion occurs, this shared emotional alignment is real, it is meaningful, and it marks a moment of profound growth for both of you.